Hello, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at a short story and I'm going to model how to find signposts in a text. I'm going to focus primarily on contrasts and contradictions because that is a signpost that in general students struggle to find. I will find all of them except for words of the wiser, but that's okay because words of the wiser is usually pretty obvious to find because someone tells, there's dialogue, someone else something that they should be paying attention to. Okay, so let's get started. This is called The Scholarship Jacket by Marta Salinas. And I'll read it and you can follow along with me. The small Texas school that I went to had a tradition carried out every year during the 8th grade graduation. A beautiful gold and green jacket, the school colors, was awarded to the class valedictorian, the student who had maintained the highest grades for 8 years. The scholarship jacket had a big gold S on the left front side and your name written in gold letters on the pocket. My older sister Rosie had won the jacket a few years back, and I fully expected to also. I was 14 and in the 8th grade. I had been a straight A student since the 1st grade, and this last year had looked forward very much to owning the jacket. My father was a farm laborer who couldn't earn enough money to feed 8 kids, so when I was 6, I was given to my grandparents to raise. I'm actually going to highlight that section because that's a tough question for a parent to have to stop and give one of their children away. That's something that most parents would struggle with. So noticing how a tough question doesn't necessarily have to be a question, but it's something that someone had to that you would infer that someone would really have to think about doing. So I'm going to move on. We couldn't participate in sports at school because there were registration fees, uniform costs, and trips out of town. Even though our family was quite agile, which means a quick and light movement, and athletic, there would never be a sports jacket for us. This one, the scholarship jacket, was our only chance. I'm actually going to say that that's contrasts and contradictions because contrasts and contradictions is when an event feels like it doesn't belong or surprises us. The narrator should be able to participate in sports because she's quite athletic. The fact that she can't is a contrast to what you would expect to happen. I'll keep going. In May, close to graduation, spring fever had struck as usual with a vengeance. No one paid any attention in class. Instead, we stared out the windows and at each other, wanting to speed up the last few weeks of school. That's another contrast and contradiction. You don't expect this character to space out, to not pay attention. She mentions that has very high grades and that she's like the top student. So the fact that she's not paying attention and she's a part of the other students who are not paying attention would be a contrast and contradiction. I despaired every time I looked in the mirror. Pencil thin, not a curve anywhere. I was called beanpole and string bean. And I knew that's what I looked like. A flat chest, no hips, and a brain. That's what I had. That really wasn't much for a 14-year-old to work with, I thought, as I absent-mindedly wandered from my history class to the gym. Another hour of sweating in basketball and displaying my toothpick legs was coming up. Then I remembered my PE shorts were still in a bag under my desk where I'd forgotten them. I had to walk all the way back and get them. Coach Thompson was a real bear if someone wasn't dressed for PE. She said I was a good forward, even tried to talk Grandma into letting me join the team once. Of course, Grandma said no. I'm going to stop that and say that's a memory moment because she's talking about some time in the past and she's remembering it that her grandma had said no. So that all has to do with money and that keeps coming up again and again. So I'm actually going to say that money equals again and again because the fact that they don't have any shows up over and over again. I think that's the 3rd time that they've talked about that. I was almost back to my classroom door when I heard voices raised in anger as if in some sort of argument. I stopped. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I just hesitated, not knowing what to do. I needed those shorts and I was going to be late. I didn't want to interrupt an argument between my 2 teachers. I recognized the voices. That's actually a contrast and contradictions because she's eavesdropping and she didn't expect it. So there's 2 contrast and contradiction moments in that. One that she didn't expect to hear someone talking and one that she's eavesdropping. We wouldn't expect her to eavesdrop because she seems like she's a pretty responsible kid, and someone who eavesdrops is probably not as responsible. You could argue with that, but we could also call that a contrast and contradiction moment. I recognize the voices, Mr. Schmidt and my history teacher, Mr. Boone, my math teacher. They seemed to be arguing about me. I couldn't believe it. I still remember the feeling of shock that rooted me flat against the wall as if I were trying to blend in with the graffiti written there. I refuse to do it. I don't care who her father is. Her grades don't even begin to compare to Martha's. I won't lie or falsify records. Martha has a straight A plus average, and you know it. That was Mr. Schmidt, and he sounded very angry. Mr. Boone's voice sounded calm and quiet. Look, Joanne's father is not only on the board, he owns the only store in town. We could say it was a close tie. So I'm inferring that somebody is saying that the narrator shouldn't get something, even though she deserves it because of her grades. So we could say that whole section is probably a tough question. They don't want to falsify the records, but we don't know. Are they going to do it? They're saying they're not, but they might end up doing it. The pounding in my ear drowned out the rest of the words. Only a word here and there filtered through. Martha is Mexican. Resign, won't do it. Mr. Schmidt came rushing out and luckily for me went down to the opposite way towards the auditorium, so he didn't see me. Shaking, I waited a few minutes and then went in and grabbed my bag and fled from the room. Mr. Boone looked up when I came in but didn't say anything. To this day, I don't even remember if I got in trouble in PE for being late or how I made it through the rest of the afternoon. I went home very sad and cried into my pillow that night so Grandma wouldn't hear me. It seemed a cruel coincidence that I had overheard the conversation. The next day, when the principal called me into his office, I knew what it was about. He looked uncomfortable and happy. I decided, well, you could actually say that's a contrast and contradiction moment because you don't expect her to know why the principal is feeling unhappy, but he does. So you wouldn't expect it. Contrast and contradictions are something that seems out of place. So you could say that that is a contrast and contradiction moment. I'm actually also going to highlight the next part in green because I think the next part is an aha moment. So I looked him straight in the eye. He looked away and fidgeted with the papers in his desk. Martha, he said, and this part, she's realized, she's had an aha moment that he's gonna make it so she can't have the jacket. So she just had that aha moment, and she's not going to make it any easier for him. Martha, there's been a change in policy this year regarding the scholarship jacket. As you know, it's always been free. He cleared his throat and continued. This year, the board has decided to charge $15, which still won't cover the complete cost of the jacket. I stared at him in shock, and a small sound of dismay escaped my throat. I hadn't expected this. So she is just having a kind of another aha moment. So an aha moment is basically when the character realizes something. She just realized that she's not going to get the jacket. That sticks out to her. He still avoided looking in my eyes. So if you're unable to pay $15 for the jacket, it will be given to the next one in line. I didn't need to ask who that was. Standing with all the dignity I could muster, I said, I'll speak to my grandfather about this, sir, and let you know tomorrow. I cried on the way home from the bus stop. Now, you could argue that this is or isn't a contrast and contradiction moment, but basically, if you knew that you were going to get something and it was denied to you, you might break into tears in that moment. So the fact that she is trying to be calm could be a contrast and contradiction moment, but she's also trying to keep her pride. So she's saying she has a tough question that she has to decide. Is she going to be calm or is she going to cry in the moment? So this is both a contrast and contradictions and a tough question. So I'm going to stop there, except I'm not going to stop there. The one last thing I'm going to say, another again and again in this, of course, is the jacket. The jacket shows up over and over again. So the jacket is another again and again moment. I'm going to stop there, I promise. And I just went through and thought about all the different signposts except for Words of the Wiser. There's lots of other examples of words of the wiser, so I don't think you're losing out. But just remember, if you're stuck on contrast and contradictions, it's something you don't expect to happen. Thank you so much. Good luck with your signpost finding.